Habs Unfiltered, episode 361. I'm your host, Blaine Pudvey, and I'm joined now by my co-hosts, Treg Wilson,
Good day.
Matt Smith,
Good evening.
and our special guest, who's returning to the show for, I believe, the third time now, Gavin Chiasson, the owner of Recruit Scouting, scout with the EL Red Wings. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, by EL, it's Elliott Lake. I was trying to fancy it up a little bit, but you know.
I've been to Elliott Lake. My dad used to live in Elliott Lake.
Ooh, interesting. There's a tie.
All world.
He was born in New Liskeard, and then his family moved to Elliott Lake, and he worked up in the mines in that area.
Nice.
When he was 15, 16.
Yeah. I spend most of my time in Sudbury. I just come up here for the summers, really, and this is probably my final summer here before I start my career after next April.
Let me guess, you're going to head down towards Toronto, London, Barrie?
No, looking to stay north or Ottawa Valley. Love that area.
It is nice in the valley, but there's something to be said about the north.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's not the center of the universe. It's just above the center.
No, that's right. It's the small of the back. All right. So in this episode, we're going to cover the draft as we have in the last few. Clearly, because the draft is coming up in Nashville on Wednesday, so we're doing this to get prepared, learn a little bit about all the different prospects, and get different points of view. Because not everyone wants to just listen to us drone on and on over and over again about the same subjects. We're bringing in people who do this for a living, or at least working their way up there. So, Gavin, you've completed your draft list with your scouting service. This being a Habs show, why don't we start with who is going to be the first person to stare down the Habs table at the draft this year?
Ooh, is that a mention to Shane Wright last year?
It is.
It never happened. Never happened.
It did.
Well, he says it didn't.
Yeah.
I like to think he did.
My eyes say otherwise.
It's so funny too with what happened last year. Like everyone had a certain opinion on Wright, and I sort of had the opposite opinion. Everyone thought like just nicest kid that there's no, and don't get me wrong, he is a very nice kid. He just, I think there was a little bit of arrogance in how he spoke sometimes. And so I had the opposite opinion of people. And then they saw him stare down the draft table and they're like, oh, maybe he does have a attitude problem and this and that. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, that was badass. Like, I love that. I thought that was, pretty cool. But yeah, I think the first person to sort of stare down the table this year really has to do with who's left up on the board. Now it could be Matt V. Michkov if he shows up to the draft next week. There's a lot of different theories sort of rolling around on what's going to be happening with Michkov, what teams he's going to meet with, if he's even going to meet with them. There's a lot of drama. So if he's there, he might think that at 5, if Montreal passes on him, he might stare them down. But, it might not be in as dramatic a fashion as Shane Wright. Shane Wright was at least picked 4th. Michkov might not go until like the 20s. He'd look at I don't think they'd care.
According to Bob McKenzie, he is going to be there the end of this weekend, and his agent has said that he's made meetings up with some teams. That's according to Bob. That was Bob McKenzie today before he put his draft list. Either right before or right after he put his draft list in.
Gotcha. Okay, good to know that. Yeah, I haven't taken a look at that thing in too much detail yet. I've been very busy today, so it's good to know that. So yeah, I guess he'll be there. So yeah, he might stare down the Habs table if he's not chosen 5th, but
yeah, so somewhere around number 8, perhaps, he'll be walking by the table.
Perhaps. Depends how those meetings go. Depends how teams feel as well. To me, there's a lot of top end talent in this class. Like there's a lot. So if you're a team who doesn't want to deal with the potential drama, if you're a team who just feels like this guy might fit our roster a little bit better, I could see him definitely sliding down to the teens or even the early 20s.
Well, that would definitely get some tongues wagging.
That would definitely. I bet every fan base would just be booing with every team selection if that happened. One after the other.
Maybe.
So the Habs can do what Grant suggested, trade back, get the 9th and 17th pick from Detroit, pick, say, Reinbacher at 9 and Michkov at 17. And then everyone's happy.
Awesome.
They still won't be. I don't know. I doubt that he's going to get past Washington, but it's neither here nor there. Now, looking at your list, Gavin, you have some very interesting setup here. At 4, ahead of Michkov, you have Zach Benson.
Yes.
What is it with Zach Benson that you saw that put him ahead of what may be the greatest potential draft pick in the history of humanity in Matvei Michkov?
Well, I might be amping him up a little bit.
Yeah.
But I definitely, they're about the same size. They're both about 5'10". But to me, if you look at Benson's track record and you look at his work ethic and you look at how much detail that he has put into his overall game, I don't think anybody could convince me otherwise that is not someone who has now made a bigger name than Michkov, who I have felt for the past 3 years, right? We've known about Michkov for a long time in the prospect world. And watching him as like a 15-year-old, maybe 16, all the way till now, I have had the same issues with his game that I've wanted to see him clean up. And it feels like he's gotten better and better at his strengths. And, he doesn't really care to fix up areas of his game that are not up to par. And don't get me wrong, that's not the biggest of deals in my eye. But it is when it's something as important as like play style. I find that Michkov plays on the outside very often. I think when Craig Button was doing his rankings on TV, I was watching it, and they were sort of showing all the highlights of a bunch of Michkov goals and points this season and whatnot. And I remember sort of nudging my dad, who's a big hockey fan as well, and he trusts my opinion on Michkov. I said, from the very first clip, I said, watch, I bet you he won't. There's not going to be a clip of him scoring down the middle. And sure enough, everything was from the outside. Michkov does not like to get into any of the dirty areas. And because he's small, that's a little bit of a problem, especially for 3 years now. He hasn't really pushed himself into as dangerous areas. It takes a lot of shot attempts, like a lot of shot attempts. So you see the highlights and you think, wow, this kid is great. But a lot of people aren't really getting to see a lot of the plays that he's making that don't pan out. And for a scout, there are times where I'm watching him and I'm like, why? Why would you take that shot? Or why not move in? Whereas with Benson, I'm just watching one of the most athletic kids in the class who has gotten better over the past 3 seasons playing with Winnipeg, who has just tremendous work ethic, good hands. Some people say the skating isn't fully there. I don't know. I don't mind his skating. I think he's a fairly good skater. But someone who just has he's a dual threat. He can shoot the lights out, but he can also make a lot of plays to the middle. But he can also play down it. Like Benson is not afraid to get into the dirty areas. And so when I look at the track record over the past 3 years of both prospects, I think that anyone, if they had paid attention to both side by side over the past 3 seasons, I think undoubtedly they would say Benson is better.
Well, Benson does play between the dots quite often. I believe most of his game is between the dots, whereas Michkov, like you mentioned, is outside the dots. And this is where the lack of live viewings is going to hurt Michkov, in my opinion. And that's, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Well, what's he doing? How is he setting himself up? Why is he making that play? If you were watching live, you'd have a more complete picture as opposed to just that camera angle. You'd be able to see, well, where's the other players? Is he noticing those players? Is he drawing defenders towards him to make a lane for those players? Like all these little things. Is he even looking to play defense at any point in time? And the answer is no. But these are things that you see when you're watching the game live. And that's why scouting these guys on YouTube tends to not work that well.
Correct.
I asked the question, or I've been saying on Twitter and asking the question, like, we know Michkov's talent. There's no denying his talent. We've seen it at the U18. But like I said, he hasn't been able to be properly scouted. Now, we know when the Russian thing happened, a lot of teams pulled their scouts out of Russia. There are some there. Bobarov from Montreal, I think it's his father or his grandfather is still a scout with St. Petersburg. But Simon St. Laurent, I don't know if you guys know this guy. It's a guy I follow on Twitter. Anyway, he wrote on Michkov, and he's high on Michkov, but he also says he doesn't do anything in the defensive zone. Like he doesn't transition through the neutral zone. He doesn't carry the puck out of the defensive zone into the offensive zone. He's, but his statement is too that his talent makes up. He's the way I read it, all I kept thinking about was Phil Kessel. Really, if you think about it, that's what I thought about. I mean, maybe not as athletic looking as Phil Kessel is, but as I read what he said about Michkov, like he said, is it the VHL or the MHL, like the lower league, the
MHL is and the VHL is like
okay, like the AHL, yeah. So in the MHL, according to him, his defense was non-existent. Like he literally just skated into the zone and waited for the puck.
Yeah.
But he also mentioned, which Michkov was that he doesn't repeat his mistakes. He doesn't, you know what I mean? Like he learns. But he didn't really have a lot of good things to say about his defensive and his transition. So
if you're picking at 5, do you really want to pick a player that's one-dimensional?
It depends. I would say it depends on the talent. Like if he has the talent to score 60 goals, 100 points, Phil Kessel, perfect example, and that's why I brought him up. Phil Kessel's a one-dimensional player, but in his prime, I'd have him on my team, 100%.
I was going to kind of make that, or at least bring up that argument. You guys had chosen a kid. I don't know if you guys know him by the name of Cole Caulfield in the past few years, 2019. And he was noted as being one-dimensional, but that one-dimensional is the most important, scoring goals. Now Caulfield has done magic for you guys. You guys just locked him up. That's a young kid as well. Do you need another Caulfield on your team? I don't necessarily think you need somebody like Michkov on the Habs, regardless if he's there at 5. I think if Benson's there, he's going to offer a little bit more than Michkov can to your team. Even Ryan Leonard, like, do you want another Caulfield or do you want like a Matthew Tkachuk on your team? There's a couple of different options at 5 that I know people say draft the best player available because at least you can maybe make a trade for him. But given the situation, I just don't see why Montreal would need to.
Yeah, and with Leonard, he plays a bit of a power game, and that's something the Canadians are lacking in their system. They've got very few players who can play that style, and that does factor in. I mean, when all things being equal, they say best player available, but sometimes those intangibles tip the scales a bit. Dvorsky, that's another name that's on Bob McKenzie's list that's fairly high up. He's a complete centerman, He's got a large frame, and he's dominated against his own age group. Maybe he's a pick there. Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe.
I think there's better prospects for you guys to grab at 5 than Dvorsky. I don't know if you read my write up on him. I have him ranked at 25, and I sort of said from the start of the year, this was maybe, you kind of have players every year that you start off high on, and you might say, this is sort of their year to lose, though. So it's either show me what you can actually do that's better than last year, because I'm not quite sure I believe your ceiling. And sometimes I say that about, people entering their draft year, if I've watched them a little bit the year before. And Dvorsky was one of those guys. I mean, I just sort of said, like, this might be his year to lose. And I think throughout the year, he's matured. He's gotten stronger. He's sort of brushed up some edges of his game. But to me, the overall ceiling is not really there for me to like him in the top 10 at least.
I mean, I personally think. Oh yeah, go ahead, Matt. I've been talking.
Oh,
Matt, you got anything?
Go
ahead.
I
I
was
was
gonna say I'll add after. You.
Yeah. Personally, I think if they don't go with Michkov, they should go with Ryan Leonard. Would be my pick at 5. Nothing against Zach Benson or anything, but I think Montreal has enough 5, 10 and below players on their team that and this includes Michkov. That could be another factor of why Michkov's not picked. But I also think the interview, if they have an interview with Michkov this week, will be very telling because they also want character players. Now, there have been reports out that Michkov's not a great teammate. I don't know how accurate that is. I don't want to sound like I'm bashing Michkov. I don't want to be called a Nazi on Twitter. So
again.
But I'm just saying what I hear. Personally, if they pick Michkov, great, awesome, right? If they don't, I personally hope it's Ryan Leonard. I think I would be disappointed if it's Reinbacher, even though I know Grant had a good Grant McKay when we talked to him, he had a good reasoning for why they should take Reinbacher. I get it. However, with the talented forwards that's in this draft, I don't think you can pass up on them. Like for defensemen. To me, Reinbacher would be we're drafting for a need, not for a want.
And I personally think there's better defensemen in the draft too.
And this was going to be my question.
But he's right-handed. That's why the other better defensemen are left-handed, and Montreal is chock full of left-handed defensemen.
Yeah, I suppose, but that is really drafting above the skill level. Like for me, I only have 3 defense in the top 20, and it's in that order: Axel Sandin-Pellikka, Simashev, and Reinbacher. Like Reinbacher's at 20, and like if you take a guy at 20 at 5, you're really. I know he's in some people's top 10s, but off of my personal list, I would probably mark that down as a big miss. At least it's not as big as when Ottawa took Tyler Boucher. I am still sad over that.
I mean, good for Tyler.
Yeah, great for him. In some regards, I guess.
Now, Matt, you could you elaborate a little bit on this part, because you did have a question on this.
My question's pretty much mute now, to be honest. It was more or less like if we talked a little bit about Reinbacher on another show, and Grant did say that it was going to be a fit. There has been reports that maybe Montreal was going to look possibly for a defenseman on the right side. And I was just going to bring up Gavin having Sandin-Pellikka at 9, and why you have him ranked so high when he's not as high on maybe some other lists.
Right. So I really tried to pay attention to those big 3 defensemen in my final viewings, just because like there's not even close to a consensus. If you were to ask people, just rank your top 3 defenders, those 3 are typically the ones that people will give out, especially as we near the draft, with Simashev catching a lot of the wave towards the end of the year. I like Simashev right from the start, but through watching Reinbacher, I felt start of the year to now hasn't really gotten all that much better. And I remember one of our scouts had made the argument in one of the um, draft meetings that we had, and I think he thought he was making a really great point where he said, "Well, yeah, but the Swiss league isn't really like a developmental league. It's a very strong and talented league. Like the Swiss league is about as well-rounded as you can get, um, but it's by no means a developmental league." And I think he was trying to use that as an argument. I just sort of looked at it as, well, yeah, I can see that. Like he's sort of rounded out his game, but I don't think there's anything elite about Reinbacher that truly puts him onto a first line. To me, like the defense is fine, and it's really good for an 18-year-old to be like defensively fine. He's not great, but he's fine. He's average in a men's league. That to me is huge. But then you look at the offense, and I think, good breakout passes, good in transition. Um, Actual offense, I don't know if he really creates all that much. To me, Reinbacher is a very safe pick, um, but I think he will fit either as your fourth, fifth, or sixth defenseman on a team, rather than first, second, or third. For Simashev, sort of similar to Reinbacher, I suppose. There's a little bit more potential. Reinbacher is miles ahead of Simashev right now, but Simashev has a large frame to fill out, and he's tremendous defensively. So even if you put Simashev on your bottom four, at least you know that you're getting a very reliable shutdown defenseman who can play your penalty kill. And he's got a little bit of offensive flair. I sort of said it at the start of the year. People were like, he's got 0 points in the KHL. I'm like, it's the KHL. But when he stepped down to the NHL, you could sort of see that offensive flair a little bit more. He needs to work on his, I would say, acceleration. Like there are times when I think Simashev is trying to fake out opponents or sort of be a little bit creative. And at the next level, he's too slow on those creative aspects to make it work. But like I said, he's got a couple of years. I think, he's not as NHL ready as Reinbacher, but I think by the time he comes into the NHL, sort of rounds out his game a little bit more, gets bigger, faster, stronger, I think he's better. As for Axel Sandin-Pellikka being my top ranked one, and I said this in my report, is he's super offensive enough to have as a top two? Probably not. But I sort of said the same things about Simone Nemec last year. And so I sort of included that in my article, whereas Axel Sandin-Pellikka will be to blank as Nemec is to Hughes. So if you compare ASP with a strong offensive defender, ASP is reliable on both sides of the ice, good in transition. He's reliable defensively. Like there's a reason why by the end of the World Juniors, ASP was playing pretty much the most amount of minutes of any Swedish defenseman. And that's the youngest guy on their team. I think, it's not too often that you find players like that. Owen Power with Team Canada in his draft year, who's playing for the men's. That's very telling to me. And I started off the year a little bit sour on Axel Sandin-Pellikka, but towards the end, I just thought he got much better throughout the season. I think playing with, he could have played on a little bit more of an offensive team where he could have let his back end playmaking show a little bit more. But I think once he comes over, that's going to sort of work itself out.
Now, with the draft strategies, looking at next season in 2024, that draft, and especially in the first round, is heavy towards defense.
Yes.
So I could see GMs saying, maybe we won't value these defensemen quite as high with the comparison to all these forwards that are coming up in this draft, because this draft is very heavy towards the forwards.
Absolutely.
So maybe follow a strategy where, I'll pick a defenseman, but I'm not going to make much of a reach for that defender.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. I've sort of said halfway through the season watching the 2024 prospects sort of come up. I don't know if it was actually halfway, it might have been 3/4. But it's like, man, there's 12 or 13, maybe even 14 defensemen who could be first rounders next year. Like, that's how strong that defense crop is. And it's sort of funny how like lopsided it's sort of getting in terms of position, because you see this year and you might say like, there's not really any good defensemen, at least no high end ones. And like, we could all be wrong about that just because the forward group is so ridiculously strong that these defense are struggling to contain them. But when everything sort of gets evened out in the NHL and, over the next few years of development, they could be fantastic defenders. And also for next year, like, these are rookies who are having to defend Connor Bedard, Will Smith, Benson, who's some OHL guys like Barlow and Ritchie, and they have to defend those guys. So as a rookie doing that, I'm like, man, I'm super excited for next year because these kids are already having to tackle on those guys in their first year. So I wonder what they can do when, they're sort of a year older, a year stronger, a year bigger. So I definitely reach for a defenseman next year. If you're that desperate to get a defenseman, you could probably hold on another year.
Okay. Matt, did you have something?
Yeah. Other than Michkov, who do you think could slide?
Well, my ranking has Andrew Cristall at 8. I don't know where he ended up on Bob's. I guess I didn't really search him out on there. But I cannot believe that people are not as high on Cristall. Some people have sort of said, I don't know if his game's going to translate. I don't really see how they think that. I've said since halfway through the season that he's for sure a lottery pick, at least. There's not many players that are as dangerous offensively as Cristall is. And I know that the skating isn't like top end or anything, but he's still a smart skater. In fact, in 2020, Craig Button, all of those big guys about Cole Perfetti said he has Einstein-like hockey IQ, and he's one of the most dangerous players in the draft. And I don't know how that comparison hasn't been made to Cristall. I argued this in our last ranking as well, that the amount of times that Cristall is able to work the puck from the middle to the outside and then make an absolutely clean pass to the slot is incredible. And the amount of times that it works out, he's one of the most dangerous offensive players. And in that meeting, I sort of said, I don't know if there's a specific metric for that. Someone said, yep, I can find it. It's like slot passes per 60 or something. And it said Andrew Cristall ranked in the like top 1% of all prospects tracked. So, I mean, he said it kind of works with your point. I seriously think like even if the skating doesn't pan out, like Perfetti wasn't a strong skater either. And I think Perfetti's looked fantastic in the NHL so far. So that's someone that I value greatly at 8. He could be a second rounder. I mean, I heard from somebody that he might even slip like past 50, which no reason why that should happen. Other guys that can slip, Edouard Saleh. I don't understand. He didn't really get all that much better this year, which I will say definitely works in people's favors for ranking him in the 20s and whatnot. But to me, not the same floor, but similar ceiling, maybe a little bit lighter for Tim Stützle. So great skating, powerful shot, able to play pro hockey right now while being so weak. I think, there's a little bit of a correlation to Tim Stützle. And looking back on 2020, I think as of right now, that might be a home run first overall pick, looking back on it. So that's another guy that I value greatly. Grayson Sachin is somebody that has sort of flew up Twitter Scouts boards towards the end of the year. But on Bob McKenzie's, I think he sat around like 50 or 55. Don't fully understand that. I mean, Sachin is very weak right now. I think he's only like 5'11", 155 or something. So there's a lot of strength to add to that. On top of that, terrific puck protection. Like, he tries to do too much, and I hate that about him. Because he really just, it's so infuriating when you're watching a kid open himself up for a golden opportunity and pretty much think like, one more deke. Come on, I can do one more silky thing, which really pisses me off. But I also think that that is very easy to round out, because once you start moving to the next level, you're going to get shut down even more than you are now. And coaches are going to rip your head off if you do it. But he has enough high end skills to sort of make it work. He's another dangerous player with a lot of slot passes. He has a lot of patience with the puck. He's very creative. He's got good speed and good pace to his game. I seriously think that he's a top 20, top 25 talent for sure. Other than that, not sure how many other people are going to slide down way past where I have them ranked. I think that's about it for the first round. Maybe Timur Mukanov. But again, I wasn't expecting to like him all that much, and the analytics sure do agree with my ranking on him. But he's also 5'8". I did say though that he reminds me a lot of Matt Zuccarello. So if that's a player that people are looking to get, like, that's a first round kid for sure.
Kristall's 27 on Bob's ranking. That's where he is.
Okay. So he could be a second rounder, he could be a first, depending on how teams feel. I hope he's a first. I mean, you're getting a fantastic prospect. I mean, he's in my top 10, so.
He's going to Montreal at 31. Heard it here. There you go.
I was just gonna say, so does that mean Montreal could get him at 31?
You guys would be great with having like a Leonard and Cristal. You've got Leonard, who has no problem playing down the middle, and he's a Matthew Tkachuk-like player, and Matthew Tkachuk does not shy away from the middle at all. He's very strong. He's big. He's a workhorse. And then you got Cristal to throw, dishes right to him in front of the net. Yeah, that would almost be a dream draft. Like, hold off on the defense for next year. Take two very talented forwards. Oh man, yeah, that's the dream.
Do you think where do you rate your goalies? What's your top 3 rated goalies in your like where? And because my prediction is Habs are going to pick a goalie at 37. And who do you think they should take at 37 if they're available?
For goalie,
Yeah.
I know I don't know. Some people find him the best goalie. Bob McKenzie's list did not have him as the best. He's 6'2", Trey Augustine. So sort of got in with the World Junior squad. He's done terrific with the U.S. national team. I just don't see how people. I can see it a little bit, because if you look at goalies' face value right now, I don't think Augustine is the best, and it's very difficult to read potential for goalies. But the movements, the athleticism, the poise, and the IQ of Augustine all show me that he's going to be an NHL goaltender. So that's about as sure as it gets. And at the end of the day, when drafting goalies, like, even people who know a lot about goalies are missing a large amount of the time, because it's very hard. But if you can get someone who, you're like, I'm sure he'll be in the NHL someday, like Trey Augustine, that's a guy to take at 37 for sure.
Would you take him over Harabo? Sorry, Blaine.
No, go ahead.
I personally would. But I know how people view a goaltender who is 6'6".
Yeah.
Almost 6'7", I think.
Now, sticking with that end of the first, early second pick, I know Ethan Gauthier has made it clear that he feels the Canadians like his game, like him, and he is definitely in their wheelhouse. But there's another forward that plays a similar game, and I'm pretty sure you've seen quite a bit of him, and that's Quentin Musty with the Sudbury Wolves.
Oh yeah.
Now,
yeah.
Blaine and his Wolves.
Yeah, full disclosure, I am a bit of a Sudbury homer, but after the Wolves made that coaching change about the midway point of the season, when Derek McKenzie showed up in Sudbury, Musty looked a lot better.
Yeah, he definitely did. I think he got a lot smarter. Like he played with more pace. He sort of trusted himself to make plays at top speed, which I like a lot. And yeah, Quentin Musty ranks at 34 for me, so it would by no means be a swing. I know some teams are sort of high on him. I'm not sure that the overall potential is really there, even with the increased pace of play, um, and his creativity and his playmaking abilities. I would certainly take him around that range though, because I think you're probably getting a middle six guy who at the end of the day, like even if things don't fully pan out, he's a pretty safe, projectable NHL player. So you got probably a third line guy who's going to get under people's skins, throw a lot of big hits. He's going to play physical. He's got that NHL like grinder mortality or mortality. What am I saying? I can't even remember what the word is.
Mentality.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing.
It's a long day. It's been a long day.
Yeah. So I think he could definitely work out like that. And it's so funny too, because you watch the way he plays on the ice and he just plays like a jerk. He just plays like a jerk. He's under your skin. He's in your face. He's very aggressive. He bullies you. But super nice kid off the ice. Like super polite, very easily coachable. His teammates like him. The coaches like him. At the end of the day, like it's a kid who, you know, is very, I guess, nice, polite, soft. But when he steps onto the ice, it's just a completely different ball game.
Yeah, he does. He's an excellent skater. He has a very high compete level. I put a lot of stock into those two skills as some of the more translatable skill sets as you can have. Now, Matt, did you have anything else?
Let's throw a Sudbury thing in there, as I know, again, Lane's a big homer when it comes to Sudbury. Matthew Mania, is that one of the better names in the draft, or?
I think the name is incredible, and I also think the player is incredible. I mean, Quentin Musty at 34 for me, and Mania is not far behind at 42. Some people feel like he didn't quite meet their expectations, which I don't know how much I fully agree with that, because to me, Mania at the start of the year looked like a top 50 pick, and I mean, he ended the year as a top 50 pick as well. He slid down about halfway through, but in my final viewings, it was like if I actually imagine how he was last year, or even at the start of the season to now, he's gotten much faster. Um, Again, sort of like Musty, where he's now at the end of the season able to make plays at top speed. He doesn't hold on to the puck longer than necessary. He's went end to end a couple of times. He radiates confidence, but he's also been fairly reliable on the back end. I've seen his defensive game grow a bit. So again, it might have just been that coaching change that really clicked with a lot of these players, and their development is looking great because of it. I mean, there's a couple of Sudbury kids who could hear their names this year, even overagers. So I think Sudbury's going to have a super strong team over the next few years, and again, that's going to build these players' confidence. Now you're on a winning team. You're putting up more points than ever. That's great for development.
I think that, well, the last few drafts, people have been showing up wearing costumes and supporting the players that they've been watching in junior. If there's not a couple of people showing up dressed up with Mania t-shirts, looking like Macho Man Randy Savage, that's a mistake.
Does he rip his jersey off when he scores? Like, does he do the whole Hulkamania?
He should.
Thing?
He should.
If he doesn't, that's a whole missed opportunity.
That would be, yeah.
Just think of the merchandise you can sell on that.
I also wanted to bring this up just because we're talking about a late first opportunity. We talked about Quentin Musty. Now, let's say for fun that you guys do take Leonard at 5, which some people think that's a bad pick. I don't at all. I would love that pick. But it would be pretty cool if you take, 2 forwards, you take Ryan Leonard, and then you take another bully in Danny Nelson from the same team. He plays like a bull, and I have a soft spot in my scouting heart for players who play like bulls. I watched Jacob Battaglia at the OHL Cup, and I overranked him. I was like, this kid just plays like a monster. He's a big-bodied guy, but he's also athletic enough that he's going to just obliterate you. Like, great shot, great skating, great, game and pace of play, but he's also not afraid to just bulldoze you. And I think Danny Nelson is in that same regard. So if you're looking for a heavy hitter who's going to play a heavy game, Danny Nelson's also a name to look out for.
And he was one of those guys that kind of had to play down in the lineup because he was overshadowed by guys like Moore and Smith, right? And so,
right.
And he still put up decent numbers.
Yes. Yeah, he's a bull. And if I'm an NHL scout in the late first, I think I finished with him at 33. Yeah. I would take him just because you want those kind of guys.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything we were going to cover. We'll enter with some final thoughts. Treg, any final thoughts?
I'm winning the podcast poll 62-38. If no one knows about this, troll Dale O'Halloran said, who got the best podcast, me or who's a Mitch? Apparently I'm a Mitchkov hater, and I've never watched him play. And that guy, I'm up 62-38, so I'm beating him in his own poll. So I just want to throw that out there. I have it on my thing. If you follow me and you want to vote, go ahead. You got another 12 hours.
Lovely. Okay. Matt, how about you?
I got nothing further. Thanks. Just to say thanks for Gavin coming on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for coming on, Gavin.
It's nice to have different opinions of different scouting services and to be able to have these conversations and kind of see how one guy falls and one guy might be really high on your list and maybe not so much on the other. So it's always interesting to have these conversations. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Actually, let me do this before we go, just because we always talk about quick fire. Gavin, who's Montreal taking at 5?
Oh, man, if he's available, I just looked down. I want you to take Will Smith. Okay. If in some world he's available at 5.
Blaine.
Will Smith is my top choice.
Matt.
I think they're picking Leonard.
I think depending on the interview, they're going with Mitchkov or Leonard. Mitchkov's interview goes well, they're taking him. I don't think Smith's going to be there. This is the only reason why I'm not saying Smith. But I think they're if the interview goes well, it's Mitchkov. If it doesn't, I'm with you, Matt. I'm going with Ryan Leonard. Imagine having a Matthew Tkachuk on your team and then people bitching about it. When they didn't pick Matthew Tkachuk, everybody bitched about it. Or who's the younger one? Who's the one that 18?
Brady.
Brady Tkachuk. Same thing. Pretty much same player. But I'm just saying. Imagine getting a Matthew Tkachuk type player and then bitching about it, but also bitch because they didn't pick Brady Tkachuk. Make up your mind, my friends.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of Habs Twitter.
Although I do get the Mitchkov thing. I do get it. I get it.
Yeah.
The Habs need a 100-point score.
Now, for me, I don't have a lot. Again, I want to thank you for coming on, Gavin. And before we get to you with your final thought, I just want to state that hot water freezes faster than cold water.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Something to think about.
It's not as strong, though. The ice is not as strong.
Well, it melts just as easily in my vodka. All right, Gavin, why don't you let the listeners know where they can find you, find your lists, and every little detail. Don't spare any of it.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at NHL Chiasson. I haven't been as, I guess, day-to-day interactive on the app over the past year. I was coaching hockey, I was scouting and trying to keep it on the low, I guess, and in school full time. So it got very busy. I'm looking to sort of change that. I'm going to be doing a lot of um, both ways. My schedule is looking great next year. So it's very likely that I'm going to be scouting both the NHL draft and the OHL draft. So if any of you are interested in that, be sure to follow me on Twitter and keep up to date because I will be posting frequently. Further, you can find a lot of my articles and my team's articles on recruitscouting.com.
Well, again, Gavin, thank you very, very much for coming on. We do appreciate your point of view and how you came to your conclusions. I think it's illuminating to see how different scouts view different players, like Matt said. And for our listeners, thank you guys for sticking with us, for providing us some, these emails and these requests for guests to come on. This is how we know who to go after and who you guys want. Although in this case, this was all for me, to be honest. So again, thank you all for listening. And remember, if you're talking